Okay, welcome back. So we've got the market, which is not going anywhere. There's about a 6.5 odd point change, but no real direction per se. Let's get some fundamental talk going now. Jyoti Vaswani is Chief Investment Officer at Future Generali India Life Insurance, and she's with us here in our studios to take us through what she makes of markets. Jyoti, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Before we get to markets and what's happening there, I mean, you're seeing what's happening with ICICI Pru in terms of the stock price getting hammered. I think I was told that it's below the IPO price, the IPO issue price. The numbers came through. Without talking about what you should do with ICICI Pru, what's happening in the business?
So I think the insurance industry is doing well, the life insurance industry. We're seeing a good growth. The private sector has grown by around 22%. YTD. So that's a very good growth. Within players, there could be some divergence as to who's growing and who's not, depending on what the business mix is. In general, we've seen that the stock markets have been not giving such good returns last year. That's impacted the flows in the ULIP sales, and I think that's reflecting in the numbers. But I think one quarter number should not be what should determine the stock price, because clearly financialization of savings is a theme which is here to stay, and we have other asset classes which are not giving the kind of returns that equity would be giving. So clearly that part is very much in place, and that should continue, and therefore the insurance would be a beneficiary of that, as well as the penetration levels are quite low as far as insurance is concerned. So the macro theme for insurance continues. It is the penetration, and so
but
one quarter of sales.
Last year growth has slowed down, right? I mean, as an industry.
I don't think it has slowed down. No, 22% is a good enough growth rate.
But it used to be higher, right?
It used to be higher, but 22% growth rate
is not nothing was scoffed at, but I mean,
yes,
the market looks at incremental growth.
Right.
The incremental growth seems to have come off.
So from the very high rates that we saw, in 2017, clearly the markets were different at that point in time. You had a 28-29% return in the stock markets, and so obviously the sentiment also plays a role in how much flows come into the mutual fund industry and the insurance industry, and that's what is reflected in the flows. And with the kind of markets that we had last year, and so therefore the numbers look quite decent. I would say the growth numbers are quite good.
Jyoti, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The Nifty is just about consolidating at 10,900. What do you think would probably be the near-term range, if you have one in mind, and maybe the next piece of news that we need to be watching out for in order to probably break through from that range either way?
So India is starting the year on a good note. We have the macros which are quite stable. You have the currency which is stable. You have oil which has come down. You have the benign inflation. You have benign interest rates. You have the banking system which is more or less cleaned up. So the macros for India seem to be in place for this year. The micros are picking up in terms of earnings growth. The way we see it is that we had very disappointment on the earnings side right from FY 2013 onwards. So we have 13 to 18, we've seen hardly 5 to 6% earnings growth, whereas the year the period prior to that, right from FY 2003 to 11, we saw a growth of around 20% plus. So clearly that earning disappointment has been there in the markets. That I think will now change. We see this year as double-digit growth in terms of bottom line. FY20 should be a good double-digit growth as well. So the micro is also beginning to look good for India. So it's just a matter of time that the markets start looking up again. Having said which, we have a major event in the form of elections coming up, and clearly in the run-up to the elections there could be volatility, and therefore it might be difficult. While the market might break through, it may not have a one-way directional up move, because there could be a lot of news flows which will determine what happens. We have the budget coming up, so there are a lot of events as of now. So probably the directional move in the market would come post-elections, where I think the market will basis the fundamentals at that point in time will take a direction. But prior to that, I think markets will remain volatile.
Jyoti, you handle long-term money, really long-term money, so you don't have monthly compulsions, and you can take a really longer view. So let's talk about Sun Pharma. With the correction, the stock has suffered, and I mean, of course, information is still. I mean, there's not complete clarity, but I mean, if there was complete clarity, the price would not be where it is, right? How do you think about Sun at this stage? I mean, if you can talk about an individual name.
So, as you're aware, I can't really speak on individual names.
Okay.
But yeah, companies where there are corporate governance issues are punished badly by the market, and therefore I think it is for the managements to step in and clear the air and sort these issues out if they want a recovery in the market capitalization. The pharma sector per se also is not looking in a sweet spot because there are challenges there. While things have improved quite a lot from where they were last year, but I think there are still some challenges, on the US generic side as well. You still see some pricing pressures, though they are much lower than what they were earlier. And you are seeing the US FDA issues getting much better, and the approvals coming through. But the pricing pressure is, not really letting the profitability come back to the levels that they were. Specialty business, where these guys are investing, the players are now investing, is a high risk, high return kind of a thing, and it will take its own sweet time to pan out. So in the pharma space, we would like to go with companies which have a larger domestic, business, and which are more focused on probably the rest of the world, where the problems are much lower. So we are looking at those companies much more than the pure generic plays as of now.
Okay.
Just one last point. What's your team like? I mean, in terms of incrementally, what are you most bullish about? I mean, at Future Generali, the investment team.
So we are liking the consumption theme, and we are actually bullish on the investment theme as well. So consumption is a long-term story.
Just to point on consumption, Jyoti, a lot of the numbers have come out from the consumption space. They expected as well today from the Pidilights of the world as well, ITC. What within consumption would you narrow down on?
So the way we see it, consumer discretionary is having some challenges from the last quarter onwards, and we expect that space, especially the auto space, to have a difficult quarter this quarter as well. But going forward, I think the theme will play out. I think it's largely a broad theme on India, where you see the demographics looking the way they are. 50% of our population is in the age group of 25. The growing middle class, the increasing disposable incomes, per capita GDP. If it grows beyond $2,000, I think the multiplier effect kicks in. So which is very good for consumption. You have the focus of the government on elevating rural stress, so that is good for rural consumption. So overall the consumption theme looks good, and it's just a matter of time before even the discretionary starts to pick up again. So as of now, we like the staples because that's growing at a steady pace, and the discretionary from a long-term perspective, we would continue to
What about investments? You said what exactly there?
In infrastructure?
Investments, you said. I mean, you do both consumption and investment.
Sorry, infrastructure.
Infrastructure, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
infrastructure.
So that is what, roads and the like?
So yes, I mean, the way we look at the infrastructure space is there's been good order flow, especially from the public sector side. The private capex is still taking some time to pick up, though in the third quarter we did see some early signs of some of the large corporates,
so what pockets really? I mean, in terms of...
So it's more of, the executors, the road builders, the beneficiaries of road
Government
orders.
capex,
Yeah,
essentially.
it's a government, everything to do with metros, roads, irrigation, power, T&D. So all these segments where, you're seeing order flow coming in,
Sure.
we would like to play all these themes in the infrastructure side.
All right, Jyoti, we're going to leave it on that note. Thanks very much for joining in and speaking with us. Well, we need to take a break now, but up next, we'll focus on some more stocks and get you some macro opinion as well.